Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the From the Farm Yard podcast. And on today's episode, we are going to be talking about permaculture. So we thought we'd bring this on the podcast because it's something I think y'all should we can all learn from it. We can all learn about it. So let's get into it. What is permaculture? So permaculture gives farmers a way to achieve high yields while doing it in a more sustainable and environmentally friendly way than conventional farming methods. So conventional agriculture tends to work against nature instead of with it. We tend to tear up the land, providing a blank slate that we throw livestock and crops onto. But there are better ways. By using principles of permaculture, you're working with nature instead of against it. So let's dive into the definition of permaculture.
The actual definition of permaculture is, gotta get to it, the development of agricultural ecosystems intended to be sustainable and self-sufficient. Pretty simple definition, exactly what Reagan just said. It's using what you have and making it the most efficient that it can be without over-industrializing an area.
And not letting things go to waste. It's using what you have and stuff. So, let's talk about the concept of permaculture, which is you first.
Okay. Permaculture is a philosophy of working with nature rather than against, like we had already said. It's
utilizing land, resources, people, and the environment in a way that doesn't produce any waste.
And with the permaculture idea and the concept of all of that, it's when you're looking at that, and what we mean by no waste, I mean, there is going to be waste in a sense, but you're not seeing it that way. You're seeing as the chicken poop, the duck poop. It can all be fertilizer for the garden, which in turn can feed you or go back to the animals to feed them or to feed pastures or orchards or whatever. Well, we'll get into that with examples. Jumping the gun here.
But did you have anything else for concept?
Yeah, it's looking at plants and animals and all of their functions and using them to get to work together instead of saying, hey, we can put a garden over here. Hey, we can put chickens over here or sheep over here or goats over here. You can have all of those things together where you have ducks going through. Well, that is another thing with examples, Zachary.
Well, let's go into examples. If you're done with concept, we can go right into examples.
Yeah, I'm done with examples.
Because there's plenty of examples for permaculture. And depending upon what type of farming, what type of gardening you're doing, you work with that and you make a plan for that. Whatever you're doing, however you're doing it, your way is going to be using, let's say you just raise chickens. Let's do this. Let's say you just raise chickens. That's what I raise. Like you said, it's taking the chicken manure instead of just like tossing it in a pile in the woods and like wasting it. You take it, spread it out over your land. That's fertilizer for the ground. Put it in your compost. That's beneficial for your compost. You take it and put it in your garden. That's good for your plants. And then when you're putting that compost into your garden, so you're putting chicken manure into your compost, the compost goes into your garden, then that compost is going to fuel and it's going to benefit your plants. So then you're growing plants and those plants go right back into your chickens. So it's a full circle. It's a full circle and it's not letting things go to waste. See, because you didn't use that chicken poop, you didn't let it go to waste and you put it in the compost, then you just added, I think it's a green material. I think it's nitrogen. You're adding that into your compost. Compost gets better. you're working with the compost. You take the compost, mix it into the soil. Then you have food for you, your family, and your animals, and all. It's really neat because it is a full circle. And like I said, there's so many examples of it, and that's just one of the many. Like I said, it's taking what you have and what you're doing on your property and your farm and trying to use it to its best ability, the most efficient that it can be, and not letting it go to waste.
Yeah. And there are I'm going to go into a few different examples here, but it is so many different things you can do with this. And it's not just like one circle. The way that I'm picturing it, and I'm going to use like a broad thing because everybody knows, like the thing with the Olympics, the rings with the Olympics, that's what it is. It's one thing ties into another thing, which in then turn, it flows together so nicely when you're doing it and everything is working in harmony. And it does take a little time to develop that system of permaculture because think about it, you're not just getting it in 1 year. I mean,
Yeah.
compost takes 6 months to age it properly and longer if you want to really make sure that everything's good. But it's, like you said, using the chicken manure, but you're also using, okay, calm yourself, Zachary. Too many ideas. When you are doing, like, I have my garden set up right here. If I had a fence around my garden, I would or if I had a problem with slugs in the garden, like my great grandmother actually does. So we are going to be taking some of our ducks over to her house and trying to get them to go through the soil, whatever soil she has, and to try to eliminate the slugs and the snails, things like that, because that's what ducks are used for. A lot of people have them going through their garden at periodically or all the time because ducks won't mess with plants. I mean, older plants they won't mess with. They won't mess with fruit like chickens will. It's a better way of doing things. Other ways are if you're keeping cows. One person that I've seen that this like works really well. How he does it is Justin Rhodes. I think we've probably mentioned him a couple times on here. He does the cows first. A day later he does the sheep, and then the day after the sheep he does the chickens. He has everything working together where it's getting rid of flies, it's also greening the pastures, it's getting rid of any invasive species, anything that cows won't eat. It's so efficient, which is what you want it to be. There are also running pigs through the forest. A lot of people do that. I've seen people do that if they're trying to clear them out, or they let their forest get intentionally bad over a year and then they raise a bunch of pigs at a time for the next 2 years and then let that forest recover for a year, and then they're continually doing that. And then yeah, it's so much goes into permaculture that when you really start diving into it, you start seeing how the natural order of things are before people were even introduced or before we even started industrializing things so much. It's really fun to watch and to read
Yeah.
about.
And like you said, it's using what you have. So if you have just animals, use those. Like you said, use the pigs. If you want to clear out property, instead of, working on that on your own, put your pigs out there. They'll work on clearing it out, but it's beneficial for them as well because they're finding stuff in that soil and they're also clearing out in the process. Same with chickens. They'll scratch and they'll eat bugs and they'll get rid of bugs. So if you have a bug problem, that's feeding them as well. And then you take the poop and like we said, I liked how you use the Olympics and the whole like everything working in harmony because it is very, very true. It's very interesting on how it works because it's just taking one thing and seeing how far down it can go just to being so efficient and stuff. It's all really interesting. But
If you're thinking about it like that, you saying that brought a good idea. If you're using the chicken manure and you're using it in your garden, that's going to, like you said, grow plants, grow fruit. If that fruit is going back to the chickens, like anything that's not good enough to eat, not big enough to eat, whatever, or it's spoiled before you got to it, or bug infested, right to the chickens. and then but if you had them in a coop at the time that you started doing the gardening, where you're collecting it for composting, and then you had them out on pasture following behind cows or sheep or whatever, then their manure is then going to turn again and help the grass for the cattle, and then that's going to be going back to food for you, which then in turn can do everything else.
It's
It
like a
is,
full circle, but it's also benefiting a bunch of other things.
yeah.
So that's basically what permaculture is. It's using what you have on hand and, you know, making it the most efficient that it can possibly be. And like we said, there's many examples of permaculture, and it's doing what is best for your farm and what works best
Yeah.
on your property.
And another example that I forgot until you just sorry, but we've talked about this before. I don't know if we talked about it on the podcast or not, but running or having having your duck and geese pen inside of an orchard is really helpful, because any fruit that falls and splits, the ducks and geese will take care of it.
Because
They'll
you don't
eat
want
whatever,
it to go to waste. That's
and
going
they'll
to go to
aerate
waste
it.
just sitting on the ground.
Exactly. Yeah. They'll keep the grass down, because geese are like little lawnmowers. And then
And
the
there,
ducks and everything,
that's working for you. You don't have to do that job.
and they're taking care of pests, which in turn help the trees, and then the trees will provide for you, but also for the ducks and the geese, which will in turn, it's the cycle. It's continuing.
And you want to make the ultimate like permaculture plan on your property. Like just look at what you have and think, how can I make this the best of its ability? How can I make this the most efficient and the most like waste reduce? Like how can I do it the best to that ability?
Yeah.
So do you have any more examples?
Not that I can think of.
No, and like you said, you can do your own research, finding there's many options for permaculture and there's different ways you can do it, but that was just a few of things that we have thought about and we have used. So what is the main point of permaculture?
The main point of permaculture is it offers a natural solution for soil health. Is it able to grow things really easily, or does it take a long time to grow? Soil health. Water conservation. If you're having like, I'm going to go back to the duck example. If you have a pond and you have trees around the outside of the pond and you have ducks and geese on the pond, then they're going to be eating the grass around the trees, keeping the trees down. The trees are going to be able to get water from the pond. The ducks are going to have water from the pond. So you're not hauling out water. You're not having to water anything. You're using those specific areas to the best of their ability. Animal habitats also, the same thing with the ducks. You are giving them a prime habitat for them to live, and it's working in such tandem with everything that it just works so well. And it also helps maximize biodiversity in different areas, instead of creating like I said it earlier, like separate little, like the ducks are over here and the pigs are over here, like just different things. You are maximizing everything and creating an ecosystem, an actual functional ecosystem. Because if you think about like the natural order of things,
Right.
it's
everything like works together.
Exactly. If you're like, think about the Great Plains in America. You have bison that are going through that area, grazing everything. They've done that for hundreds of thousands of years. They've just lived there, continuing what they're doing, and it's helped grow the grasses. Everything's maintained. It's been stable. That's really the main point of this, is for everything to be stable and self-sufficient.
Right, and God intended it to be that way. He put these animals on earth for a purpose, so that they would all work together and function properly. And then and it's like we said, like I said in the beginning, it's working with nature instead of against it. Because I think a lot of times with conventional agriculture, we do just wipe out nature just to put our, large crops and to put our large cattle like herds and stuff, and in the process we're wiping out the way it was initially intended, and we're not working together. Instead, we are wasting, and we are not working with nature. We're working against it.
Yeah.
And I think
Because if
that's a
you,
huge part of permaculture.
for sure, and if you're like, if you like, I'm going to say this might whatever offend people, I guess, kind of. But if you're doing like industrial pigs, instead of raising them inside of a building, which is a lot of times where they are, raise them in forest. Like, they're clearing how much forest just to have everything around that, like everything around that facility where you're keeping them. Let the pigs go out. You're paying much more for feed. You're paying much more for housing. Pigs would rather be outside wallowing
And
around in mud and eating everything that they have available.
yeah,
That is in turn going to grow better food, and they're going to be ultimately happier. And I know that's been
and it's healthier for them too.
a big topic.
It's
Yeah,
healthier for them, and if you're eating them, it's healthier for you. Because think about
yeah,
all that's going into their bodies while you're keeping them in those, buildings. All they're getting is just that grain. All they're getting is just that feed. Instead, if you did grow more naturally per se, and they were outside, they're getting more beneficial, like health benefits. They're getting what it was initially intended to be. They're more free range, they're more grass fed, and in turn, that animal is going to be better for you. It's better for the animal, and all in all, it's just a better way of doing it. My
yeah.
thoughts.
And mine too. And it's sad. I mean, I realize why we've gone to the more industrialized way of raising things. It's quicker in a sense when you're just grain feeding something, but it's not sustainable. I mean, whenever you're looking at things, all it takes is for something to shut off and you don't have access to that anymore. Like, I'm not trying, like, if we lose power for a prolonged period of time, everything that's dependent on those buildings,
Yep.
or anything that's dependent on that, they're not going to have that, and then it's going to cause a whole thing. Anybody who's been here for a while, we've all lived through it with 2020 and everything else leading up to that. But if you're doing it away from that, if you're doing it in a more sustainable way, you don't need to rely on like a power grid. You don't need to rely on, if something happens, you are doing it yourself, or you are having someone else do it in a sustainable way. Reagan is itching to say something.
And I am. And you said about, sustainability. I think a lot of you said about 2020, I think a lot of people's eyes have been opened to what can happen whenever things do shut down. We had avian influenza hit, and we talked about this in the egg shortage video. It hit those big, large companies, and all their chickens died. That meant egg prices went up. Chickens were dying, which meant less eggs, so they had to increase price because they had to pay for feed. Us backyard chicken farmers didn't have to worry about that because we were still getting eggs. Yes, we had to pay for feed, but our birds are also getting free range bugs. They're getting free range material, and they weren't hit by the avian influenza. But it's eye-opening because you're seeing that, people are so dependent on, government, and they're dependent on, agriculture just always being there. They just think it's always going to be there. And then when egg shortages like this hit, then people really see like, oh, like what happens if it actually all goes down? And I think that's a huge reason why we're doing this podcast, because we do want to educate you guys, because at some point something could happen, and some people just don't know what to do. And you're going to be coming to your farmers and being like, hey, can we buy eggs off of you? This is why we're educating you all, because I think it's important to know how to learn, to know how to do this stuff, and to be self-sufficient if it ever happens.
Yeah, and we don't feel those effects right away. When the egg prices started going up, those chickens died 6 months before all of that happened. So we felt it 6 months after all of that, and then we felt it for a few more months. And I don't know, I don't look at eggs when I go into the store because I don't need them.
Exactly.
I mean, I look sometimes just because I'm curious, but I think they've dropped a little bit, but it didn't hit right away. Same thing with beef. The way that people are raising beef, we had all that stuff happen in, I think it was 2020, late 2020, early 2021, with everything out in the Midwest with like the cattle dropping dead or whatever. And then you don't feel that for 18 to 24 months after, because the process of raising up a steer or whatever is not felt immediately. It's 18 to 24 months out before you even start feeling that, because they don't grow really. I mean, they grow at their pace, but it takes longer for them to grow. So you do start feeling that whenever. So enough about our little
yeah, we went a little off there, but good stuff.
What else did we have?
Podcast today. Good stuff.
Do we want to do permaculture design, or do we have anything else before?
That was it for me.
Okay. With the permaculture design, and it's the same concept as like regular permaculture in a sense. You are using everything efficiently, but when you are thinking about it in a larger sense, like when you're designing something, the only way that I can kind of think about it is like if you lived at the top of a mountain, what would you, and I'm going to say the conditions are perfect, eliminating everything else. If you lived at the top of a mountain, what would you want closest to you? If you had chickens that you were collecting every day from, would you want to walk all the way down that mountain every single day to get those chicken eggs? Or if you had a garden that
is key, people. Efficiency is key.
Exactly. And if you had a garden that you were harvesting from or watering, would you want that all the way at the bottom of the mountain? No, you would want that close to the top. So you would have your house at the top. The next level would be your chickens and your garden, and then you can feed food scraps from the garden to the chickens, chicken manure to the garden, in turn feed the garden, full cycle. And then farther down, if you are milking
you can put
cows,
your chicken coop in your garden. That way it's right there. Obviously, don't let your chickens in your garden, because your chickens are going to eat your garden produce. But still, if you put the coop in the garden, then you can just take the waste directly from the coop right into your garden, or right into your compost pile if you have it all together.
And then, like, if you're milking cows every day, yeah, you might want that a little bit closer, but I would still put that down below the chickens and the garden level, just because of like space necessarily.
Plus, cows need more space than chickens do.
Yeah, space. And then
for grazing purposes.
Yeah, and then you can always have like a barn on that second level, but then majority of them would be on that third level that I'm talking about. It's like a pyramid. We've been over this before. We talked about the packing order being a pyramid. This is very much a pyramid as well.
It's figuring out a plan that works best for your space and what is making it the most efficient and the most self-sufficient.
And if you're going to those things every day, you want those closer. So if you're designing a farm, if you're building a farm, really do think about those aspects of things. Where are you going to want to travel a long way to get to your chicken coop or your garden? Think about all of that when you're designing things. But I think that's everything that we had.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's everything for today's episode. We hope this enlightened you a little bit about, I think the ultimate thing is, yes, we talked about permaculture, but I think the biggest thing is about efficiency and self-sufficient and making that a lifestyle and working with what you have, making a plan, and making it the most self-sufficient and efficient to your space.
Yes.
But thank you all for watching, and we will see you in the next episode.
Thank you all for watching. Bye.